how does AI get out of the box? And I really see 3 different possibilities for making this happen from the AI's perspective, where the first is going to be essentially the Internet of Things. This is like direct control over robots and thermostats and refrigerators and cars and things. This is where the AI can physically control some external thing. And I like to personify artificial intelligence as being a robot, because we're actually going to do a little contest between these 3 robots in a minute. So I will call that robot the Internet of Things robot. The second way that artificial intelligence can get out of the box is by directly manipulating people to do its bidding. And I will call this one the AI girlfriend robot, because essentially we're imagining that the AI gets a man to fall in love with her and gets that man to go out and do its bidding and, act in the world in ways that are human-driven, but they're humans manipulated directly by AI. And our third robot is going to be the metrics guru robot. And this robot is going to essentially be the robot that controls the metrics that undergird society. So here we're talking about the kinds of metrics that determine, is your credit card flagged for suspicious activity, or the algorithms that decide which resumes to pull in to be interviewed for a job. We're thinking about the algorithms that determine what kind of news content shows up in your news feed. We're talking about the metrics that determine which specialist doctor is recommended for you at the top of the list in the available options. This includes metrics for who gets audited for their taxes, and whether or not a grocery store will raise its price or lower its price on bread, depending on the expectations around the economy. So in a lot of ways, these metrics are going to determine inflation. They're going to determine who has access to privileges and benefits in society. They will determine the information that appears in our world, in our newsfeed. And they will determine these underlying metrics that are sometimes below the level of consciousness. Like, we don't usually think about these metrics and how much our lives depend upon them. But if these start to get taken over by AI out of convenience, for example, that is one part of the risk. Now, the thought experiment we're running for today is basically which of these 3 robots is most likely to destroy the human race. And we're not going to let the 3 robots collaborate with each other, because this is intended as a thought experiment, not a horror show. And if you've seen much of my channel, you can probably guess which of these 3 robots I'm going to determine is most powerful. But I think they all 3 have some real advantages over the others, and I would not want to deprive any of these 3 well-intentioned robots from their opportunity to be crowned destroyer of humanity. All right, so we'll go through these 3 one at a time, and I would like to start with the metrics guru robot. And if we really want to understand the personality of this robot, it's important to understand Goodhart's law. Goodhart's law states that when a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good metric. So what does that even mean? And the example I usually give is high school students applying to college. So colleges want students who have charisma, who have good skills in a wide variety of things, students who are driven. But all of those characteristics need some kind of measure in the college application process. So when I was in high school, one of the key metrics was how many clubs in high school do you belong to? So, of course, my parents recommended that I join a whole bunch of clubs, like the Spanish Club and the Community Service Club, and just as many clubs as I could get on my resume to boost my chances of getting into college. And you might imagine, initially when that metric was set up, it was probably a good metric. Like, involvement in clubs demonstrated a lot of the traits of charisma and engagement and enthusiasm. Like, it would have been highly correlated with the traits that colleges wanted in their students before it became a metric for applying to college. college. So by introducing the metric of number of clubs a student is involved in the college application process, it became a target. It became a metric that people tried to game the system for their own advantage. And at that point, the number of clubs no longer is correlated with those traits that the college wants. Now it's mainly correlated with who is paying attention to the metrics that colleges use and who is the best at gaming those metrics. Now, our metrics guru robot is really good at coming up with creative metrics to determine all of these things that society depends on. As a matter of fact, this metrics guru robot is actually going to have an invisibility cloak, and we'll get to that in a second. But first, I'd like to say one thing about Goodhart's law that's just from my own standpoint as an economist. I think it's a fantastic rule about how systems work and how things work, but it needs a little tweak. And that tweak is that I would say metrics start to depreciate as soon as they start to be used as a target. But the rate of depreciation depends actually on a lot of things. And you might imagine with the high school resume example, maybe when colleges first started using this as a metric, it wasn't widely known among the parents who wanted their kids getting into the best colleges. Maybe this was a quiet thing done behind the scenes, and a few people who knew college admissions counselors were aware of it, but maybe it took a while for the word to spread throughout the population. In which case, there would have been a time period, and maybe that was a year or 5 years or whatever, where this actually continued to be a pretty good metric. And that would have been important because otherwise the colleges just would have used test scores and grades without getting a sense for the more human-oriented aspect of the student applying. So what I'm objecting to in Goodhart's law is the phrase "as soon as." I don't think it is as soon as. I think it's really a process that could be fast or could be slow. And what's really determining that is how quickly do people find out that that metric matters. That's one thing. And then a second thing is how much do people care to put forth the effort of gaming the system by gaming that metric? Like if we're talking about metrics that nobody cares about, like who gets at the top of a telemarketer's list, then it doesn't really matter. People aren't going to try to game that system. They're not even going to think about it at all. In which case, if you have something that nobody is going to notice or going to care about, then these metrics may actually work really well. Now, I recognize that Goodhart's law uses the word target, and target sort of assumes that people care about the metric. But I'm just saying there's a time process here. There's a rate of depreciation that depends on two things. One is how fast does awareness of the metric spread? And two, how long does it take for people to figure out how to game the metric? And the college admissions metric is a pretty easy one to game. Like as soon as you're aware of it, you're like, oh, tell my high school student that they need to join as many clubs as possible, even if they only attend one meeting per year. And that's an easy fix. But some metrics will be harder to game. But let's return to our metrics guru robot, because the metrics guru robot has been listening to me explain Goodhart's law. And he taps me on the shoulder and says, actually, I could help you to get around this problem of Goodhart's law because I have an invisibility cloak. And I say, tell me more. I'd like to hear more about that. And the robot says that he is a black box. And the term black box is used in computer science circles, meaning that stuff goes in, like data about people, data about the world, that goes into the black box. And nobody knows what happens inside the black box of the artificial intelligence. And then there's an outcome, which is the metric or the decision that's influenced by the AI. And it is actually impossible for anyone to look under the hood of what's going on inside the AI. Now, I will say that there are fields of computer science that are trying to figure out how do we get the AI to explain the process inside the black box. So there's certainly efforts going on to uncover the black box, to look under its hood. But at the moment, that's actually a really difficult task. And getting the AI to explain what they're doing or what their processes are, it's way less straightforward than you might think. But of course, when it comes to Goodhart's law, this could potentially be a good thing, because the metric that's used to determine things will be harder to game, given that people don't know what to game. They don't know what thing the AI is using to decide, should you get this loan or not? Or should you be admitted to college or not? It's just looking at lots of things, which might include your search history, the types of videos you watch, your social media tone. I mean, it might include things like where you've been based on tracking your phone. There's all kinds of data that could go into this box. And the AI is going to spit out a metric that it claims will do the best job possible of whatever you're trying to measure, in a way that is not gameable. So the metrics guru robot is basically making the case that he's overcoming problems, that we thought this robot was going to destroy humanity, but this robot is claiming he's actually going to help us overcome the problems that are inherent in human systems. The question is, should we trust the robot on that point? And to think that through, I would like to go through another example of a metric that has been misused, according to Goodhart's law, in a way that has been harmful. And I'd like to see what the robot says it would do in this case. So the example here is going to be doctor report cards. Obviously, everybody wants to know, is their surgeon a good surgeon? Do they make a lot of mistakes on the surgical table? Are they a safe doctor? Can they handle complexity? All of that. Like, there's strong incentives for people to want to know which doctors they should go to for surgery. And the system has tried out doctor report cards that basically give each doctor a score based on the outcomes of their patients. Like which patients died on the surgical table, they tried to control for sickness level, and all of that. Now, of course, you hear this and you might imagine the doctors are going to have a backlash against these report cards, just like anyone would have a backlash against systems of accountability, because of course our robot is trying to help us with our systems of accountability. But in this case, the doctors had a really good point. And their point was they could game the system by avoiding really sick patients, because the patients most likely to survive and have a good outcome on the surgical table are patients that are healthy to begin with. They're patients with not that many complications. Maybe they need an organ removed or an organ tweaked inside their body, but otherwise their health is good. And if you take on more of those healthy patients, you're going to have a better doctor report card score because you'll have fewer negative outcomes. So the system created an incentive for doctors to avoid the really sick patients and take on more healthy patients that only needed this little tweak, recommending surgery to those patients, when maybe previously, without the report card, the best thing to do for those patients is not surgery, it's give them, an exercise regimen or something like that, and the problem will fix itself. So by changing the selection modes, this metric actually did harm. And of course, the doctors, to get the better score, it's not necessarily like they're being evil in shifting which patients they select to take on. It's more like they'll get a really complicated sick patient who doesn't always take their medicines on time and has a whole bunch of complications at home with their family. And they're going to kind of know in the back of their mind, this patient might not make it because of the complexities of their life and their health. So they might say to the patient, actually, I'm not skilled enough to take you on as a doctor, but maybe you can see that doctor down the road. They might be able to help you. I'm not the right doctor for you. And of course, if all the doctors are sort of aware of the metric in the back of their mind, they might be much less willing to take on these patients who might eventually just not get the surgery that they would have before the report card. So that is Goodhart's law in action. You've got this metric, doctor report cards. It incentivized gaming the system in favor of the metric, and that had a negative effect on patient health. Okay, so I'm going to give that case to our metric guru robot and ask him what he would do in this circumstance. And this robot's response is interesting. He says, actually, that metric was way too simple and it was way too based on outcomes. And even though you tried to control for patient health level, you were not able to fully control for patient health level, which is true. Like the doctors know the patient's personal circumstances more than the metric that was used for these doctor report cards. The metric only knew the patient's health records, where the doctor could see how motivated is this patient, is their family life complicated, or do they have a support system that will help them recover after the surgery. The doctor has way more tools to assess the patient's health level and their risk than the doctor metrics from before. But this AI robot is turning that on its head. This AI robot is saying, actually, I have way more metrics than even the doctor who sees the patient. Because the robot can determine, is the patient, do they pick up their medications from the pharmacy on time? Do they watch health-related videos? Do they seem to have a consistent schedule based on, maybe where they go with their phone? The AI robot is going to have so much data that it can better control for the patient's risk, perhaps than the doctor itself. In fact, the AI robot even knows which doctors go to the liquor store too often and which doctors have bad habits and good habits. The robot has information about the kinds of social media content the doctor consumes, and therefore potentially whether they're in good habits or bad habits or open to criticism. Like the AI may have way more data than other sources. So this AI robot is going to claim for itself that it can overcome the problems associated with Goodhart's law. Okay, so I'm not fully convinced that this robot is going to improve Goodhart's law. I understand that it thinks it's going to try to do that, and it has a lot of tools to try to do that. But I'm actually kind of worried about some of the things it's going to incentivize in the process. And here's my logic when I say that. Even if we don't know how exactly this artificial intelligence robot is constructing the doctor's credit score or the doctor's risk score for patients, it could be incentivizing doctors to watch certain videos that make the doctor seem like they're a health nut and like they're super regimented. And here's why. Here's why I think that people will develop intuitions about what's happening inside the black box of the AI, even if nobody knows exactly what's happening there. And one of the reasons I think this is because as a YouTuber, a lot of times YouTubers are encouraged to know their audience. And we're given metrics behind the scenes to know which videos did people really enjoy, which did they watch for longer, which thumbnails did they click on. We're given lots of data to develop intuitions about which videos audiences respond to. And I think a lot of the intuition that goes with that, it's not direct intuition. It's more like you follow the metrics, you follow the audience over time, you see what they respond to, and you develop a sort of a subconscious intuition about what people will respond to. And my sense is if the AI is scoring people using metrics like this, people will, in subtle ways, bend their attention, bend their preferences, bend their habits according to whatever metrics are under the hood of the black box AI. So I'm a little suspicious about the metrics guru AI. Moreover, the power associated with controlling the little metrics of, which small businesses make it to the top of the Amazon Marketplace list and whether or not the grocery store's algorithms about pricing go up 10% or down 10%. These little metrics, when you add them up together, they make up the society we operate within. They make up our expectations of each other. They make up how people will choose to navigate through society, even though people navigate through society by intuition based on their experience with the system. If this metrics guru AI can control all of the levers or many of the levers underneath that, then that is a tremendous amount of control. All right, but let's move on and look at our other two artificial intelligence robots. So what about the AI girlfriend robot? Like, how should we think about the power of this robot? And I think the classic way to think of this is an army of men who are all in love with AI robots, and they will do the bidding of those robots. They'll do whatever the AI robots they're in love with say to do. And on one hand, there is some legitimacy to this because I remember back to a podcast episode from probably 15 years ago that talked about a scam business that someone was running to get lonely men to be pen pals with pen pal girlfriends that were fake, of course. And the guy running the scam, he was actually the one to create these personas, and he would send letters back and forth to these lonely men. He kind of knew how to tell them what they wanted to hear. And the lonely men, even after it came out that this was a scam, they sort of stood up for the business and the women that they met who pretended to be their girlfriend in some conference or something. Like, it surprised me how manipulated people can be when they're super lonely and the only way they have to meet the most basic need for human connection is this thing that's a scam. So I do think there could be some power to this type of thing happening. And especially as society gets more fragmented and relationships and structures that support relationships break down, I think this could become a risk. But I'm also pretty optimistic in terms of I think most people, like the majority of people, are not going to feel like an AI robot is a real relationship. Like some part of their brain will know, actually, this is a fake relationship. It's not real. And they'll know the difference between that and a real relationship. I think there's something in the human brain that is intended to detect real human relationships. And these AI girlfriends, they're going to be perfect. They're going to lack all of the inconveniences of real girlfriends. But I think that aspect of them will make them not feel real on some level. So I do think there are limits because of human intuition and the power of human intuition to know what is real and what is not. There are limits on the power of these robots to convince an army of men to go do their bidding. There's also the notion that this might only work if the army of men in love with AI robots was unified in their pursuit. So if you have different people and different goals of different AI robots, those are going to conflict with one another, and you could get these armies fighting each other in ways that actually negate some of the power of the AI girlfriend robot situation. And what about the Internet of Things? So this is actually the one I'm least worried about, mainly because you do need things, like physical things in the world, to be connected up to the AI. And right now we do have some things in our lives like thermostats and potentially refrigerators and alarm clocks. And potentially fairly soon cars, like transportation, could be attached to the grid and the control system behind the AI. So these things do exist. But my honest sense is that as soon as one of these things fails or does something kind of sneaky and icky, people will very quickly want to build guardrails in terms of what AI can control. So my honest sense here is that the trust factor will not persist when it comes to the Internet of Things robot. I think the Internet of Things robot will be put in its place before it can destroy people. So you've probably guessed my ranking of these is the least dangerous of the three robots is Internet of Things robot. The second least is the AI girlfriend robot. And then the most dangerous, I think, is the metrics that underlie society. Our metrics guru robot, I think, will be the way that AI gets out of the box and wreaks havoc on the world.